Welcome to the Beyond Show, the place where history comes to life. Again. Today we have a truly legendary guest, one whose name is woven into the very soul of Ireland. He was a slave, a shepherd, a missionary, and ultimately, saint. He walked among kings yet lived in humility. He changed the faith of a nation and became a symbol of devotion, courage, and transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's greet the man beyond the legends, beyond the parades and the shamrocks, St. Patrick.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here, though I must admit it's quite something to be speaking about my life in this way centuries later.
St. Patrick, your story is both awe-inspiring and humbling. Let's start at the beginning. You were kidnapped as a teenager and forced into slavery. What was the single hardest moment of that time?
The first night, alone, afraid, and uncertain if I would ever see my home again. It was then I turned to God, not out of wisdom, but desperation.
I can't even imagine. But returning to Ireland, after everything, surely that took more than faith?
It took fear as well. Faith does not erase fear, my friend. It carries it. I was terrified, but I was called, and a calling must be answered.
And the shamrock? Be honest, was that your idea, or just a good story passed down through time?
The shamrock. Whether I plucked it from the earth or not, it serves its purpose well. God's truth is often best told in the language of His creation.
Speaking of stories, what's the biggest misconception about you?
That I was great. I was not. I was weak, stubborn, and unworthy. Yet God's grace does not choose the mighty. It chooses those willing to serve.
And now, you're celebrated every year in Ireland. Do you ever think it's a bit ironic, considering you weren't actually Irish?
Not at all. Ireland took me as a slave, then welcomed me as a son. It is not where you are born, but where your heart finds its home.
Now, about the snakes, because let's be real, Ireland never had any. Was that a metaphor?
Aye, a metaphor indeed. The true serpents were not of flesh, but of the soul. Paganism, sin, the shadows that keep men from the light. That was the battle I fought.
Let's move to something intriguing. If you could sit down with any modern religious leader, who would it be?
Pope Francis, for his wisdom on humility and service. The Dalai Lama, to speak of peace across faiths. And Bishop Robert Barron, to discuss how to bring the gospel to a world that so often turns away.
Quite the lineup. Now, looking back, do you think you fulfilled your purpose, or was there still more you wished to do?
There is always more. But a life is not measured by what is left undone, it is measured by what God has willed.
Wise words. And what do you think about modern Ireland? Religion isn't quite what it was in your time.
I pray that faith remains, not merely in churches or traditions, but in the hearts of the people.
You had divine visions that guided you. Can you describe what they felt like? Were they dreams, voices, something else?
Like a whisper upon the wind, yet clearer than any voice of man. A certainty that left no room for doubt.
All right, let's get modern. If I handed you a smartphone, what's the first thing you'd Google?
How to turn it off. Too many voices clamor for attention. Better to listen for the still small voice of God.
Fair enough. But if you did have an Instagram, what kind of content would we see?
Parables, prayers, and glimpses of God's handiwork in nature. No boasting, no vanity, only truth.
That's refreshing. Now, let's talk about St. Patrick's Day. If it had existed in your time, how would you have wanted people to celebrate it?
With acts of kindness, prayer, and a deeper devotion to God, not with revelry and drink.
Well, about that. Today, Guinness and parades define St. Patrick's Day. Delighted or horrified?
Amused, perhaps. but I would rather see hearts filled with faith than cups filled with ale.
If you could time travel and experience one modern-day St. Patrick's Day celebration, where would you go?
To the quietest chapel in Ireland, where a few faithful souls gather to pray.
People wear green to honor you. Do you approve, or should they be dressing in something more biblical?
If it reminds them of Ireland's beauty, so be it. But better to be clothed in righteousness than in mere color.
And what would you say to someone who only knows you as the guy with the shamrocks and beer?
There is more to every story than its symbols. Seek the truth beyond the festivities.
That is deep. But if you could add one new tradition to St. Patrick's Day, what would it be?
A day of service. Feed the hungry, clothe the poor, visit the lonely. That would be a true celebration.
All right, let's test your social media skills. If you had to rewrite one of your famous prayers as a tweet, how would it go?
Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me. In all things, let him be my strength. Faith, humility.
Short, powerful, and even #friendly. Now, you spent years in solitude as a shepherd. How did that shape your faith?
Silence teaches what words cannot. Alone with the sheep, I learned to hear the voice of God.
Speaking of life's simple things, what were your little human pleasures?
Even a servant of God is still a man. I took joy in the warmth of the sun after a cold night, the scent of rain upon the earth, the crackling of fire in the dark, a piece of bread after fasting, the sound of a lamb's bleat in the morning mist, soft grass beneath weary feet, and above all, the peace of solitude, where the only voices were the wind, the river, and God.
That's poetic. Many people struggle to forgive those who wronged them. How did you find the strength to return to Ireland and forgive your captors?
Forgiveness is not a feeling, but a choice. Christ forgave me. How could I withhold it from others?
You converted thousands, but were there ever moments you felt like you failed to reach people?
Many resisted, some mocked. But my task was never to force belief, only to plant the seed.
Faith has evolved a lot since your time. How do you feel about Christianity today?
Faith endures, though men falter. I pray that Christ remains at the center of all things.
Speaking of power, many saints lived in extreme poverty, but today, some churches are incredibly wealthy. Should faith be simple and humble, or is wealth a tool for spreading the message?
Wealth is neither good nor evil. Only the heart that holds it matters. If it serves the gospel, let it be used wisely.
That's fair. What's one thing people often misunderstand about faith?
That it is easy. Faith is a path of struggle, but it leads to peace.
And what's your biggest advice for someone struggling to find their purpose?
Seek not your own purpose, but God's. In His service you will find your true calling.
That's a good advice. Today's world is obsessed with success, fame, and wealth. What do you think people should really be chasing?
Grace, wisdom, and love. These endure beyond the grave.
Now let's imagine. If you had to be the patron saint of something other than Ireland, what would it be?
Probably exiles, wanderers, those who feel lost but are being led home.
That's fitting. Would you rather debate a druid or give a TED Talk?
The Druids and I had our share of words. But I would rather teach than debate. Truth speaks for itself.
All right, so if you could pick a modern symbol to represent your teachings, what would it be?
Let me see. Maybe a simple flame. Faith is light in the darkness, and no wind can quench it.
Some say you had a staff with magical powers. If you could use it just once in today's world, what would you do with it?
Not to part the sea, nor strike down foes, but to open blind eyes to the truth.
If you could teach a modern class on one subject, what would it be?
The power of prayer. It is the bridge between earth and heaven.
I would attend that class. Would you rather go on a pilgrimage or a road trip across Ireland?
A pilgrimage, always. For every step taken with God is a journey home.
Fair enough. And what's your absolute favorite thing about Ireland?
The land itself, its rolling hills, rushing rivers, and endless green. But more than that, the hearts of its people. Fierce, faithful, and full of longing for truth.
Ireland has a deep and complicated history. In more recent times, there have been crimes committed in the name of God. The Magdalene sisters, religious wars. Do you think Christianity is still better than paganism?
Ah, my heart weeps for such things, for the hands that claimed to serve God, yet brought suffering instead. This is not the way of Christ. True faith does not chain, it sets free. It does not wound, it heals. If men use the name of God to justify cruelty, they do not know him. Better a pagan with a pure heart than a so-called Christian who does evil.
Powerful words. If you had to explain the main principles of Christianity to non-believers today, what would you say?
Christianity is not about power, rules, or fear. It is about love. Love God, love others, and seek truth. We believe in a God who became man, walked among us, suffered and rose again, not to condemn, but to save. Faith is not a burden, but a freedom. Forgiveness is at its heart, not just from God, but within ourselves, to forgive and be forgiven. And above all, life is not about wealth or status, but about serving others, finding peace, and walking in the light.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for your true answers.
Ah, my friend, it is I who thank you. For your questions were not mere words, but a journey through faith, doubt, and truth. May your path be ever lit by wisdom, and may your heart always seek what is eternal. Go with grace, and may the road rise to meet you.
That was St. Patrick, his journey, his faith, and his truth. From the hills of Ireland to the hearts of millions, he was more than just a legend. He was a man of resilience, conviction, and purpose. What do you think? Does his story still inspire today? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more incredible guests from history. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, history isn't just the past. It's still speaking. This is The Beyond Show.